Let's begin with China. We are in signs of escalating US-China tensions, this time on semiconductors. Reports say Apple has put on hold plans to use memory chips from China's YMTC in its products. China's chip sector is already troubled by recent US export controls. It is warned they could put more stress on global supply chains. Last week, US Commerce Department passed a sweeping set of regulations which were aimed at kneecapping advancements in China's chip industry. It enforced broadly it was there, and regulators, they could bar research labs and commercial data centers access to advanced AI chips. They can also prevent Chinese chip fabs from purchasing critical manufacturing equipment and force US nationals working at advanced Chinese chip companies to resign. It's happening already.
Semiconductor chip war. An article from Reuters says Washington has imposed unprecedented restrictions on U.S. citizens and residents who work for Chinese semiconductor companies. In its ongoing tech war with China, the United States has taken multiple steps in the past decade to hamper Beijing's ascendance in the technology sector. Washington has already stonewalled Huawei from the 5G market, imposed sanctions on another Chinese telecom firm ZTE, and bullied Dutch company ASML into holding delivery of chip-making equipment to Chinese firms. But the policy announced by President Joe Biden on October 7, 2022 is by far the toughest, as it goes beyond restriction technology transfer to Chinese military, the primary cause of concern for Washington. No. The cause of concern for the USA and the American people is Joe Biden. That's the problem. Everything he touches turns to ish. The problem emerged. This administration is a total loss. This will go down in history as the worst administration. This president makes the Jimmy Carter era look like a vacation in the Caribbean. I digress. Excuse the rant. Let's continue. The latest U.S. export controls mainly target U.S. persons who work for semiconductor firms in China. This measure, in my view, is a huge blow, says Dr. Monique Chu, a lecturer of Chinese politics at the University of Southampton. Since the early 2000s, China's semiconductor firms have veiled heavily on foreign talent, including expats educated in the West and engineers from neighboring Taiwan. And many of these Chinese returnees and Taiwanese engineers working in the China industry either have U.S. green cards or dual nationalities. Dr. Chu tells TRT World the urgency to act stems from the fear that Americans and its allies could fall behind in the race for advanced chips, which will power everything from self-driving cars, supercomputers, data centers, to space rockets. So let's get more information, guys. Editor, roll clip. Fair use.
It's the piece of technology that controls pretty much all electronics, from cell phones to cars, even products like refrigerators and ovens. And now, the question is, could computer chips be the next global battleground? Joining us now, visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Chris Miller. He's the author of the new book out tomorrow entitled Chip War: The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology.
Chris, thanks so much for being with us to see the future. As one of our guests said earlier this morning, you just have to look to the past. I remember reading a book called The Japan That Can Say No in 1989, when the author said, we Japanese don't have to put up with the Americans anymore. We make the computer chips that guide their nuclear weapons. They either do what we want them to do, or their missiles will fall helplessly into the sea. Here we are, 30 years later, and we've put ourselves in a position of dependence where chips are all, they're coming out of China or Taiwan for the most part. How did we put ourselves in that position again?
Over the past 30 years, the manufacture of computer chips, which we rely on for everything from PCs to smartphones to dishwashers, has shifted to East Asia, to Korea, to Taiwan, and to China. And today, Taiwan produces 90% of the world's most advanced processors, which you get in an iPhone, for example, or a PC. And so as a result, our access to semiconductors is imperiled by growing US-China competition and Chinese threats to retake Taiwan. And right now, there are many types of chips that we can only acquire from Taiwan that simply can't be made anywhere else in the world.
The US considering a crackdown on chip makers in China, semiconductor wars have taken a new turn. The US is now planning to place a limit on exports of American chip-making equipment to China. The latest move is aimed at halting China's advances in the realm of semiconductor production and protecting American firms. Under the action being considered, US officials would ban the export of tools to China used to make microchips with more than 128 layers. Tensions between China and the United States over the tech sector are nothing new. The US Congress last week approved legislation aimed at helping the United States compete with China by investing billions of dollars in domestic chip production. The US has also proposed a Chip 4 alliance, which would include South Korea, Japan and Taiwan as a collective strategic partnership of global chip manufacturing powerhouses. The US Senate has also voted to advance a bill that would provide $52 billion in subsidies to domestic semiconductor manufacturers and maintain America's competitive effort in a bid to establish an edge over China.
Chip stocks selling off today, extending recent losses. NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, Applied Materials all hitting 52-week lows. Now, U.S. restrictions on China's access to chips and dire demand forecast stoking those concerns out there that the sector's downturn may be longer and deeper than we initially thought. We want to bring in Chris Miller, the Fletcher School at Tufts Assistant Professor of International History and author of The Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. Chris, it's great to see you. So these new curbs from the Biden administration obviously adding to that bearish sentiment out there on the street. I know you have been very closely tracking this global fight when it comes to chips. I guess what's your perspective of the new limitations that we got from the Biden administration?
Well, they are a sweeping set of restrictions on the sale of certain advanced chips to China, as well as a whole set of chip making technologies that are really going to restrain China's advances in this sphere for some time to come. It will limit China's ability, for example, to build out advanced data centers and deploy artificial intelligence. There's a risk, of course, that it also spurs China to invest even more in domesticating its own chip technology. But for at least the next couple of years, China will find it very difficult to get around these rules. They'll hurt some U.S. chip firms, but they'll hurt China even more.
And what about just the risk of retaliation, too, right, as we have this escalating tension between the U.S. and China?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. We can't rule it out. It is worth noting, I think, that in the past, when the U.S. has rolled out comparable restrictions in terms of the transfer of tech to Chinese firms, like when the U.S. restricted the sale of chips to Huawei in 2020, China did nothing in retaliation. So if that's any guide, China might not do much this time. Of course, this is a more dramatic action than even the assault on Huawei in 2020. So it's possible China could change course. But the reality is that China still needs U.S. chips. Even though certain types of chips are no longer possible to sell to China, China spends more money importing chips than it spends importing oil. And that's been the case for the past decade. And so the Chinese realize they're in a weak position here. They've got to have access to chips made in the U.S. or chips made in Taiwan or South Korea that are based on U.S. technology. And unless the Commerce Department of the United States gives them approval, that all could be cut off.
Hey guys, it's Jose, your regular Joe Blow again, keeping an eye out and my ears open to these man-made wars. Instead of letting entrepreneurs and markets work themselves out by competing, again, the U.S. has the need to interfere in affairs that are none of their business. As always, more problems to make stuff less available, harder to work, and to make money. And at the end, the people always end up taking the bill on all the stupid that it costs when you don't create nothing but more sanctions, regulations, and more rules. I'll continue to root for the innovators and the entrepreneurs to find a way around all these elites and their red tape. Their diplomas and theory-based ideas at the end will always fail against the people that make this world by truly applying actions every day, day in and day out. So guys, do your research and I'll stay on this to see what comes of it. Thank you always. I appreciate the support and I'll continue to do my best to bring you the best. Moving forward, guys, stay free.
It ain't hard to tell. I excel, then prevail.